All right, I'm going to leave this up to you guys. Do you want me to go over the difference between du and sie again? I will gladly do it. It's very easy to explain, and it's something that is a common question, but I'll leave it up to chat. Yes, please. Yes. Okay, we have 1-9, so Argus, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to live with it for today. Relatively simple topic, but super important, and so no shame in talking about it. So, we have du versus sie. Sie with a capital S. Now, this wasn't a question, but I'll just go over it really, really quickly so nobody gets left behind on the formal front. Du is the second person singular. So, you, one person. English makes this kind of difficult, but we'll get there. You, one person. Formally, we call that second person singular, right? First person singular is ich, I. Second person is you, du. That was my shoulder cracking. I'm okay. Sie is either formally, it's third person plural, they, but when it's spelled with a capital first letter, it's used like zweite Person Singular. Formal. Or zweite Person Plural. Formal. Oder förmlich, not formal. Förmlich is what we say in German. Which means you, two or more. You, one person. So, that's a lot. Let's address the first one really quick first. Sie. You will know this if you know all the forms. It's ich, du, er, sie, es in the singular. So, Einzahl. And wir, ihr, sie in the plural. So, more than one person, right? So, technically, sie is either female singular, but that is not ever what this refers to, so we'll just ignore that. Technically, it is third person plural. There's a history behind it. I don't think it's important. You just need to know that the form, and therefore also the form of verbs of the third person plural, is used as the formal address, both for one person and for multiple people. That's the main thing to know formally. It used to be same as in English, French, Russian, Italian, Spanish, like most languages that have a formal way of addressing people use the second person plural. So the plural you. In German, it's just the third person. That's what it is. Können Sie mir helfen means can you help me, but in the formal way. A plural you informally is ihr, but formally it's sie. And yes, and this is something you need to realize, especially if you already know a language where the formal address is ihr, so the second person plural, because it doesn't make sense in that way. I don't know of a single other language that uses the third person plural as the formal way of address. So anyway, that's the formal part. Now, when do you use which one? English speakers particularly tend to have an issue with this. I'm just going to say this for everybody who natively or very well speaks another language that uses formal address. You use sie in every case where you use the formal address in French, Spanish, Russian, whatever it is, right? Wherever you use a respectful / formal version of address, that's where you use sie in German. Class dismissed. You can go. Please don't go. This is a stream. We'll talk about other things too. But this is easy for you. Why this is tricky for English speakers is because you don't cognitively awarely differentiate between formal and informal you, you might feel the difference depending on who you're talking to, but you don't change the words you use depending on the person you're talking to. Additionally, in American culture, work culture as well as college culture, it is fairly common for people to formal/polite, right? There are workplaces in which it's totally normal to still have like a formal interaction with one another, but use first names. In that case, if you were to translate those conversations to German, you would most likely translate them using first names, but Sie. This is rather funny in some translations of American shows, because translators are always going to have the issue of, okay, this is a workplace, people address each other using you, and they address each other by first names. Do I translate this as du, or do I translate this as Sie? Sie / the formal address is used when you are talking to person of authority. This is basically the general thing, but this can mean multiple things. So, easiest stuff is like a boss, a teacher. This doesn't include me because I always introduce myself on a first name basis, which in German is an automatic du, right? If you are per du, or the equivalent would be per Sie. You might have heard that already. So if you are per du with somebody, you use their first name, which means that if somebody tells you their first name or tells you to use their first name, you address them with Sie. You address them with du, sorry. So because I always say, ich bin Katja und ihr seht, so I'm talking to you informally as well, Deutsch für euch, I have established, rather rudely, but I think it's fine because I want to be on a communal basis with you all, I have established that we are per du. We call each other du, right? So you don't ask me, Katja, können Sie mir helfen? You say, Katja, kannst du mir helfen? So, the teacher thing doesn't include me in this case. You also say it as a child to adults. Not your parents, but the parents of your friend, unless they tell you otherwise. So it's a relatively common phenomenon that kids in elementary school need to first learn about addressing their teachers with Sie sometimes. And it's really interesting to observe that some kids know this instinctively because they've heard people use Sie and they're sensitized to that. That was the case for me. But then other kids just don't pay attention to that because they've never had to, and most people around them address them with du, and they address them with du, so parents, grandparents, whatever. So they may not be like attuned to language enough to notice it. So it's quite common for elementary school kids, Grundschüler, to call their teachers du until they get corrected. However, unlike in places like in Japan it's quite common for a boss to call his employees, mostly it's his, but their employees, in a more familiar way, like not talking down, but like talking with basically reinforcing the authority. That isn't what happens in German. You also talk to your subordinates and just general colleagues with Sie, unless somebody says, let's just duzen each other. Duzen. That's the verb. Siezen. Duzen oder siezen wir uns? These are legit verbs that you use in this context. Haben Sie mich gerade geduzt? Did you just you me? So, generally, when you speak to a person of some authority / an adult that you are not acquainted with. Now, this is kind of, especially nowadays, this isn't a general rule. So in some contexts, people will fall into using du pretty quickly. This happens especially in like social fields or generally like more open liberal workspaces. Usually this will be announced. So basically you start a new job and somebody will be like, oh, we are on a first name basis here, which in German would be wir duzen uns hier. But generally, if you don't know, if you're not sure, and you're in an environment where you're meeting a bunch of new adults that you don't know yet, you will use Sie unless you're trying to make a point of calling people du. There are some people who just call everybody du, but they tend to do that to make a point about social hierarchies, basically, right? I don't owe anybody a formal address just because that is the cultural norm, basically. But generally, you would just use the formal address with adults. Since this question just came up, können wir mit Kindern du sagen? Yes. Children do not have the luxury of ever getting siezt. You always call children du, which serves for an interesting classroom situations when students turn 18 in school, because they now basically have, it's not a legal right per se. I don't think anybody could take anyone to court for not using the formal address. That would seem like a very German thing, but I think that's a bit outside of the scope for us as well, unless you can frame it as some sort of general disrespect. But nevertheless, teachers who are respectful towards their students, basically, will at some point in higher education ask them, Wollt ihr, dass ich euch sieze? Would you like me to call you by formal address? Would you like to be siezt? Or they just start doing it until, most students, especially nowadays, will decline this. But nevertheless, we still consider becoming an adult, becoming, entitled to being called Sie. Children of whatever relationship are generally duzt by adults, also among one another. There are no children that say Sie to each other unless they're playing a game. So generally you use Sie with the things I mentioned, people of authority, whether that be your boss, a teacher, a child, or just another unfamiliar adult, whether that be a colleague, or somebody at the store, or somebody that you're talking to on the phone, your doctor, your plumber. Generally, if you're interfacing with an adult that you don't know yet, who you've naturally transitioned to saying du, or who you've made the decision to use du with, you will use Sie. A lot of people want to be referred to with the they-them pronoun. Is there something similar in Germany right now? Yes, this is a lovely thing that English has developed. Not just since we've thankfully become more aware of, some people not being comfortable with being gendered all the time, but we've used this even before, right? English used they, them in general when they were trying to generalize. So talking about anyone or anything and not wanting to say he or she every time. Or if you're talking about somebody whose gender you simply do not know, using they, them. No, German does not do this. So right now, I think German is in a bit of a transitional period. People who insist on doing it for one reason or the other. So it will not be in colloquial language. If we say they, them in the sense of, I don't know what gender this person is abstractly, we will still say er oder sie. Wenn eine Person das will, muss er oder sie, etc. If it's about somebody who asks to, have neutral pronouns used with them, I think most people right now will use they, them, literally, they, them, the English pronouns. Simply because we don't have a better solution right now. We'll see where that goes. Oh, the question was, well, legally you have to address a cop with Sie, right? Not legally. I don't think you legally have to call anyone anything outside of not calling people insulting things. But you are running the risk of immediately establishing a hostile tone with a police officer, because of course that can be very easily like spun into you being just generally disrespectful. So people who just start saying du to police officers tend to be anti-establishment people who will make a point of it. You can do that. It's not forbidden. You do run the risk of a pissed off cop trying to somehow pin something on you, or pin something on you sounds wrong, but like make a case out of something, right? Spin the du into something insulting. So probably just shouldn't, unless that's how you want to spend your afternoon. If you're working in a shop and a young guy comes to the shop, we should use Sie to talk to him. That, I guess, is a gray area. If you're not sure of the age of somebody, some people will default to Sie and some people will default to du. Some people even default to du to, like, for addressing anyone who is like, who they perceive as like significantly younger than them. So there are some people who might be like, you know, who might generally address people who are 20-ish years younger than them, or at least that's how young they perceive them to be, as du, regardless of whether that person is an adult or not. How you deal with that if somebody does that to you is up to you, right? If you make a point of then calling them Sie, or if you immediately switch to calling them du as well,